As an autistic person, have you dealt with immune issues, including allergies and being sickly as a child? So, this is what I'm going to talk about today. There was a study recently come out, and I'll put you a link. But what they did was they looked at, I think it's 10 different, what they call actually 13 different immune, what they call biomarkers. So, what they're looking at is different parts, different molecules that make up the immune system. And what they found is that there's a greater amount of certain immune system molecules that are associated with people who have autism. So there isn't a direct connection, but one of the theories behind the connection of having a problems with your immune system and autism is that one of the theories is that a woman, when she's pregnant, when she's bringing the child up in her womb, the fetus, and she could have an infection. She could have allergies of her own. She could also be in not the greatest of environments, and that can impact the ability of the fetus to grow correctly. And one of the things that they found is that the neural connections can be interfered with as far as there's a problem with what's called pruning. So what happens is that when we from our fetus all the way until old age, we have our neurons, which are nerves inside our brain. And what happens is that they're supposed to have a pruning mechanism, just like neurons, nerve endings throughout our entire body. There is a certain amount of, now there has to be regrowth of the nerves. And this is even, we're talking in the brain. So the neurons, which are the nerves of the brain, can regrow. But one of the things is that when they get damaged, there's supposed to be this pruning mechanism. So the whole idea is that, just say our nerves and our neurons can be like a bush that grows out, and those leaves and all that can we're going to be needing to use that kind of metaphor for our nervous system. If we don't prune those nerves, if we don't prune those neurons, there's going to be a lot of faulty ones in there. And also, there can be problems with too much energy. I've talked about this in a previous episode, where there can be too much energy being used in certain spots of the brain. And because there's not enough energy to send that signal to other parts of the brain. So there can be too much connections, too much energy being produced in the brain in certain areas, and not enough to be produced in other areas. And the signal strength can drop because of there being too much information in one end and not enough in the other. And so there's too much energy and not enough energy. So it's a little bit confusing, but the bottom line is that the way that the nerves are being produced is uneven. And so that's why there's many different ways autism can express itself. Neurodiversity can express itself. Asperger's can express itself. So the deal is that there for just about, for like somebody was talking to me about, there's many different flavors of autism, and probably each person that could be considered autistic has their own unique version of their own autism. And the problem is that, like I've talked about before, is that the way they diagnose, the way the health professionals, psychological professionals diagnose autism, is they look at the symptoms. and it becomes all about symptomology. It's your outward, what you look like on the outside, how you're being triggered, and a lot of the clusters of how you're triggered, how you respond to people in crowds, how people have problems with eye contact because of overwhelm from too much information. So, a lot of the ways that they're looking at autism is from the outside, looking in. But when we really look at the way autism is expressed, it's inside going out. And it's our inability to be able to communicate properly to people that are neurotypical, because we're only 2.3% of the overall population of the world. So a lot of the times, if we're in a work situation or in a just a social setting, we may be the only one that has this condition, and everybody else is able to communicate with each other, but we're unable to communicate with them. They're unable to communicate with us, so we become outcasts. So what I want to look at and is that they broke down 13 different types of immune molecules, and so these names you may not be familiar with at all. So, but that's okay. That's what we're doing, is learning. So one thing called IL-17, in which it stands for interleukin 17. It says that IL-17 levels are higher in some children with autism and are related to neurological and autoimmune disorders. And they've done a lot of studies on mice, and what they do is they try and expose the mice to an environment which causes the mice to grow up to mimic autism. So a lot of the studies that have been done, especially biological studies, a lot of them are done on mice, and they're trying to equate that into human behavior and into human biology. It is still a bit of a stretch, but they're doing their best. So this IL-17 is related to neurological and autoimmune disorders. It says mice exposed to IL-17 during pregnancy show autism behaviors. So, another one is called Fibroblast Growth Factor 1, which also stands for FGF1, helps regulate cell growth, division, and brain development, and may be connected to autism. So there's another one called IFN-g. INFG, it doesn't say what it stands for, but levels are not properly regulated in some children with autism. So any one of these is not the end all be all. It doesn't mean your child's autistic if they have too much of one or another. But a lot of what they find is that, and I'll go back to this, but one of the things is that when you have a dysregulated immune system, have allergies, have an autoimmune condition, and your body's freaking out whenever there's something new, that comes into it. A lot of times, that's what happens with people with autism. That's why they want the same, is because they're used to the same. The same works. And even with your biological environment, if you eat something and then you get a reaction because you've never had that food before, all of a sudden, people are enjoying themselves at a restaurant, and you're trying to enjoy yourself, but you want to pick the same because you know that works for you. But then somebody wants you to be adventurous, and then all of a sudden you could have a reaction. So you just have to be cautious, and you have to plan out what you're going to do in case this reaction happens. So maybe bringing some antihistamines, be able to take some allergy medication maybe beforehand. That's not a non-drowsy antihistamine. That could be something, but I'm not a doctor, so don't take my advice on medical advice. But one of the things that I have found that has worked for me is taking antihistamines, like non-drowsy histamines, in low doses. has actually helped my behavior, because what they found, and I think I've talked about this in previous episodes, is that antihistamines, a lot of autistic people have a lot of allergies and they have high amounts of histamine being produced. So histamine causes people to be inflamed, and it can make you feel bad, because you get aches and pains in your joints. You get a stuffy nose, you can't breathe right, and all of a sudden you become a mouth breather, and you're trying to speak, and then you can't even get the right amount of breath. And of course, that's going to throw you off. Of course, you're going to have a bad mood. And so, bottom line is, if you can do these things at lower doses on a regular basis, check with your doctor and make sure that you're okay taking these things. Try them out beforehand. Go by what your doctor says and read the label and use as directed. So getting back to this, something called IL-10. It's probably interleukin 10. The balance between pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory, what are called cytokines, like IL-10, is important in autism. So I'll dive more into this in further episodes, but so the bottom line is they found this test that they can do to test for these what are called biomarkers. So they're looking at, well, people with autism generally have higher or lower amounts of these ingredients that make up the immune system. And so what they're trying to do is this is very preliminary, but what they want to do in the future is come up with some sort of a test, and they have to test this on a lot of people. 10 or 20,000 would be a good amount of people to test this on, to show how well does this tell whether your immune system is off, and whether you could be autistic, and whether you're uh, any helping regulate any of these immune biomarkers could help you relieve yourself of these triggers and help you deal with life better. So there's a lot of things in here. So there's one called IL-4RA. High levels of IL-4 levels are associated with autism. IL-6, it says IL-6 levels are not properly regulated in people with autism. So there's a low amount of the IL-6, as far as associated with autism. Something called procalcitonin might be related to calcium in some way, but a hormone version of it. It says procalcitonin is an inflammatory marker in patients with schizophrenia, but there is no known connection with autism. So that's a good thing. But there are people that on the spectrum that they can suffer from schizophrenia. But so there's a bunch of different ones of these, and so the bottom line is, I'll just read one about the IL-17 and how it affects autism. Interleukin 17 is a pro-inflammatory, what's called cytokine, produced primarily by a type of white blood cell called Th17 cells. Cytokines are small proteins that play an important role in cell signaling and can affect the immune system's response. In the context of autism, research has been shown that some children with autism have elevated levels of this IL-17. Although the exact mechanisms connecting IL-17 to autism are not fully understood, studies suggest that they can contribute to neuroinflammation, which is inflammation of the central nervous system. Neuroinflammation has been implicated in the development and progression of various neurological disorders, including autism. In animal studies, it has been found that mice exposed to elevated amounts of the IL-17, interleukin 17 levels during gestation exhibit autism-like behaviors. This suggests that an increased level of IL-17 during pregnancy might influence the development of the fetus's brain, potentially increasing the risk of autism. It is important to note that not all children with autism have elevated IL-17 levels, and more research is needed. And however, these findings point to a possible connection between the immune system, inflammation, and the development of autism, which could help guide future research and potential therapeutic strategies. So, with that, the bottom line is there's many parts to the immune system, and the medical establishment has still not really gotten a clear, concise response on how to deal with the immune system. So, like a lot of autoimmune disorders are hard to deal with, and the drugs out there are rather basic, and a lot of them are, your over the counters are basically just trying to lower the amount of histamine that's being produced, and none of these even have anything to do with histamine. So a lot of these are very niche things that they still don't understand, and I don't even know if there's any real drugs out there, medicines that can affect any of these parts of the immune system. But the bottom line is that if you are having allergies and you are autistic, you do need to look into what in your environment, including food, including clothing, materials, including inside your house, how clean your house is. One of the things you might want to get is an air purifier that cleans out all the particles. You can get one on Amazon. I'm not selling it, but I forgot. I think mine's called Shark. I got a discount. They're just doing a blowout. I think pre-Christmas, and it was like normally like $400 or $500, and it was like $200. And but it's lasted a long time, and I don't use it all the time. I just I live in a fairly good neighborhood with fairly clean air, and but that's one of the things is that I had to move because I didn't really realize, because a lot of the times us autistic people, I know that I experience this. I'm not excuse me. I'm not fully in touch with what's going on with my body at all times, and I get into this concentration mood, and I will totally ignore what's going on with my body, and then all of a sudden I'm exhausted, I'm fatigued, I am hungry, and I'm angry, and I'm probably isolating myself, so lonely and tired, and that's called halt. And that's when you can get triggered to act out on people, be pretty much an ass. And if you have drug addiction problems, you might lead yourself susceptible to using substances which are going to harm you in the long run. But help you feel better in the short term. But the long term is what we're looking at. So, bottom line is, this video is getting long, so I'm going to leave it here. I will put a transcript, a little bit of a transcript of what I was talking about, and in the below, and I'll put a link below. And so this has been Dan. This has been Finding Your Hidden Superpower, Autism, Asperger's, and those of us who are neurodiverse. Bottom line is, if you have allergies and you're not feeling physically well, of course you're not going to be feeling mentally well. So we have to take care of our entire body, our mind, our body, because it's all one. So have a great evening, and I hope this is helpful. And if you have any suggestions of what you want me to talk about, let me know, because I'm just hunting and searching for new stuff to talk about all the time, and I'm trying to find it in scientific news. So, anyway, have a great night.